Welcome to Study Hall, a special segment of the Deep Dive. This is where we take a stack of your sources, articles, research, our own notes, and really try to unpack the most important nuggets of knowledge or insight.
Yeah, think of us as your guides through, well, sometimes a lot of information.
Giving you a shortcut to being well-informed, maybe with some surprising facts, and hopefully just enough humor to keep things interesting.
And in Study Hall, our segment is, but why, though? We dig into the origins and the sort of underlying reasons behind things that really shape our world.
Exactly. And today we're launching into something that, well, it touches pretty much everyone's daily life these days.
Oh, definitely. It's hard to escape.
It's a topic filled with innovation, psychology, huge societal impact, and maybe for some of us, a bit of a wake-up call.
We're exploring the evolution of technology's frankly remarkable ability to capture and hold our attention.
And crucially, what happens when that ability stops being just, a side effect and becomes the actual goal, the intentional design?
Right. So we're diving into the sources you've provided, looking at the history, the mechanics behind addictive technology design, its impacts right now, and maybe where this is all heading. Think AR, VR, AI. It's quite the scope.
It really is. So our mission today, using exactly what's in this material, is to grasp the significance of that shift. We've had worries about tech before.
For generations, yeah, often called tech panics.
People worried about radio, TV, but these sources, they make a really compelling case that what we're dealing with now is fundamentally different, a qualitative shift.
It's not just that tech is captivating or sticky, as the sources say. It's that it's engineered to be that way, purpose-built to keep us hooked.
So we want to unpack the why behind that deliberate engineering. What are the psychological tricks or mechanisms they use?
And what are the costs, the real costs, personally and for society?
And how are different places around the world trying to handle this? It's a big puzzle.
Okay, let's get into it. And maybe the best place to start, as the sources suggest, is actually looking back at those earlier moments, the ones often just called tech panics.
Right, because it feels like our current anxieties are totally new, but they're really not. The sources remind us that this kind of worry about new tech grabbing our attention, pulling us away, it's happened before.
And often, those past concerns got dismissed, written off as, overreaction or technophobia, just people being scared of the new.
Take radio back in the 1920s and 30s. Comes into the home, and suddenly it's taking up time, taking up attention.
Yeah, the sources mentioned Sidonie Grunberg, a child development expert back then. She talked about kids being absolutely transfixed by the radio.
Transfixed, that's a strong word.
It is. She even wrote about parents feeling more helpless facing the radio's pull than they did with, say, books or newspapers, which were earlier home invaders of attention.
Wow. More helpless than books.
And those radio shows, they were masters of storytelling, serialized dramas, comedies, designed to keep you tuning in day after day, hooked on the story.
Okay, so that's radio. Then comes television, especially after World War II.
And the adoption rate was just incredible. Almost no homes had TV in the late 40s. Then boom, by 1955, over half of American households.
And the anxieties just amplified, right? Similar worries, but maybe bigger.
Definitely bigger.
Yeah.
Fears about kids seeing adult stuff, westerns, crime shows. Violence in cartoons became a big concern, too.
It wasn't just vague worry either. The American Academy of Pediatrics, the AAP, they actually started making recommendations, screen time limits for kids.
Exactly. And there was even specific controversy cited, like over the show Teletubbies. Remember them?
Oh, yeah, with the simple language.
The fear was that its very basic language might actually hinder speech development because it was replacing real human interaction for toddlers parked in front of the screen.
So even back then, these technologies, they were, well, sticky. They could hold attention really well.
That's the phrase one source uses. Uniquely good at holding our attention, even the older stuff. It had this inherent stickiness. It drew people in, sometimes for hours.
Okay, and the pattern just continues. Next up, the 1980s, video games explode.
And suddenly parents are genuinely worried about kids losing themselves for hours in, let's be honest, pretty simple, repetitive games like Pac-Man.
Oh yeah, Pac-Man fever was real. And arcades got a bad rap too, didn't they?
Definitely. Some saw them as these dens of vice, wasting time, wasting money. Although, interestingly, sources point out not everyone saw it negatively.
Oh.
An addiction specialist mentioned in the material actually suggested games could be a benign outlet, a way to channel intense focus or satisfy that natural urge to master a skill.
A benign outlet, that's a different perspective.
But when games moved into the home onto consoles, that made it so easy for those sessions to just stretch on and on. Hours could disappear. That addictive fun became a much more common household issue.
And then the 90s, the early internet.
Initially, it was all hype, right? The information superhighway, research, global communication, all this potential.
But it didn't take long for the other side to show up.
No. Concerns quickly popped up about people spending, and this is a, quote, unhealthy amounts of time lost in chat rooms, or early online games like MUDs or Ultima Online.
Unhealthy amounts of time, that sounds familiar.
And this period gives us that amazing story about psychiatrist Ivan Goldberg. In '94, he jokingly makes up Internet Addiction Disorder, IAD, in an online forum.
As a joke, like a parody.
Exactly, a parody of the official psychiatric manual. But then, he was apparently stunned by how many people responded seriously, saying, "Yes, that's me, I struggle with this."
Whoa, so the joke accidentally tapped into something real.
Completely.
Hi.
It led him to start an online support group for people who felt they did have IAD.
That's wild. And it wasn't just him. Others were taking it seriously, too.
Right. By 1996, psychologist Kimberly Young proposed the first sort of formal definition, borrowing ideas from things like pathological gambling. She even made a questionnaire to diagnose it.
Okay, so the idea of tech addiction, or at least compulsive use, was definitely around even then.
Which leads us back to that really crucial point the sources hammer home. Despite all these earlier worries, sometimes being dismissed.
As just panic.
Yeah, as panic or technophobia. There was a real kernel of truth there. Radio, TV, video games, the early internet, they were uniquely good at holding our attention. They were sticky.
It wasn't just imagined.
No. And while the line between healthy use and unhealthy obsession was, and still is, blurry and personal,
Hmm.
the fact that so many people across different times struggled to moderate their use,
Yeah.
it suggested these things were pushing some kind of primal buttons in our psychology.
Okay, they were sticky, captivating. Got it. But here is where the big shift happens, according to the sources. The move from that to what we see now with social media, smartphones, and what's coming next.
Exactly. This is the core argument. That stickiness, which used to be more of an observed side effect, something that happened because the tech was engaging,
Right, a byproduct.
it transformed. It became the intentional design goal. It wasn't just about making something useful or fun that people happen to spend time on.
No.
No. The primary objective for many modern platforms became the deliberate, calculated engineering of features designed specifically to maximize the time and attention you spend using them.
Okay, hold on. Maximize time and attention as the goal. Why? What's driving that?
The sources point squarely at the rise of the attention economy.
The attention economy. Define that for us.
It's basically an economic system where your attention, my attention, the listener's attention, our time spent looking at screens isn't just valuable. It's the main currency.
Our time is the currency. How does that work?
Because the longer you stay on a platform, scrolling Instagram, watching YouTube, whatever, the more chances they have to make money from you.
Ah, okay. More ads shown.
More ads, yeah. More opportunities for in-app purchases, more likelihood you'll sign up for a subscription. Your attention is what they sell to advertisers or monetize directly.
So keeping us hooked, keeping us scrolling, watching, clicking, it's not just a nice to have for them. It's essential.
It's described in the sources as a lucrative imperative. It's fundamental to the business model.
Wow. A lucrative imperative.
And companies measure success by engagement metrics. How long do people stay? How often do they come back? They boast about it. Users love our infinite feed. They spend twice as much time in the app.
But love might not be the right word if it's engineered compulsion.
That's the tension, exactly. High usage equals success for the company, but it doesn't necessarily equal well-being for the user. It just means the design goal, maximizing usage, was achieved.
Okay, so how do they actually do it? How do they engineer this hook? This brings us to persuasive technology.
Right. Persuasive technology isn't some vague idea. It's the intentional, systematic application of principles from behavioral psychology.
Behavioral psych, like understanding habits and motivations.
Precisely. Using that understanding to design products that encourage specific habits, foster compulsions, and basically shape user behavior, often without the user fully realizing it.
That sounds manipulative.
It can be. The sources trace some of the roots back to Stanford University, to B.J. Fogg and his Persuasive Technology Lab, later called the Behavior Design Lab, starting in the late 90s.
Fogg, what was his key idea?
His behavior model became really influential. It basically says behavior happens when three things line up: motivation, ability, meaning it's easy to do, and a trigger.
Motivation, ability, trigger. MAT.
Right. And that model, the sources say, became a kind of blueprint for habit-forming products. Entrepreneurs who were building early social tech, like Instagram's co-founder Mike Krieger, apparently sought Fogg's advice on how to design for habit formation.
Wow, learning how to build habits directly from the expert.
And then you have figures who came from inside the industry and started blowing the whistle, like Tristan Harris.
The former Google design ethicist, he's become a major voice on this.
Absolutely pivotal, according to the sources. He has that incredibly stark quote about tech companies hiring 1,000 engineers
To go up against your brain chemistry. Yeah, I remember hearing that.
and whose job is, quote, to break down user resistance to logging off. Just think about that image.
1,000 engineers working to keep me scrolling. It's unsettling.
It really is. And Harris popularized that phrase, the race to the bottom of the brainstem.
Meaning,
Meaning platforms aren't just competing on features anymore. They're competing on who can best tap into our most basic, primal psychological drives, fear, anxiety, social validation, excitement, to keep us glued.
he compared the smartphone to a slot machine, didn't he? Like a casino in your pocket.
He did, the Vegas casino analogy,
Yeah.
designed for unpredictable rewards, constant stimulation, and compulsion.
Which is a perfect segue into the core mechanics the sources identify. Dopamine and variable rewards.
Yes, dopamine-driven reward cycles are absolutely central, and the key word from the sources is intentionally exploited. This isn't an accident.
Okay, break that down. How does the dopamine part work?
It taps into a fundamental psychological principle.
Yeah.
Variable rewards. Unpredictable rewards are incredibly compelling, much more so than predictable ones.
Like a slot machine versus a vending machine.
Exactly. With a vending machine, you put money in, you get your snack.
Hmm.
Predictable? Okay, fine. But a slot machine, you pull the lever. Maybe you win big, maybe you win small, maybe nothing. That unpredictability is what makes it addictive.
The uncertainty is the hook.
That's it. And tech applies this constantly. Every time you refresh your feed, check notifications, post something, you're essentially pulling that slot machine lever.
Hoping for a little reward.
Working for something. A like, a comment, an interesting new post, a message. You don't know what you'll get or when. And that anticipation, that variability, is what drives the compulsion to check again and again.
So when you do get that reward, the like, the notification, what happens in the brain?
That's the dopamine hit, or dopamine rush. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter tied to pleasure, motivation, reward seeking. Getting that little digital reward triggers its release, makes you feel good for a moment.
Ah, the positive feedback loop.
Precisely. It reinforces the behavior that led to the reward, making you want to do it again. It's tapping directly into those primal psychological buttons.
Okay, the psychology makes sense. Now let's connect it to the actual features we use every day. The sources give specific examples.
The absolute classic example is the like button. Apparently, its internal code name at Facebook was awesome.
Awesome. Of course it was.
It's designed perfectly to deliver those tiny, instantaneous social rewards. Each click is a little ping of validation, a microdose of dopamine.
And Sean Parker, Facebook's first president, he was brutally honest about this later, wasn't he?
Amazingly so. Quoted in the sources saying the goal right from the start was, and this is direct, to consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible
Consume time and attention.
by exploiting a known vulnerability in human psychology. His words.
Exploiting a vulnerability, not connecting people. Wow.
It's stark. And then there's Justin Rosenstein, the engineer who actually built the prototype for the like button. His perspective is also really telling.
What did he say?
He called the notifications from likes and things bright dings of pseudo-pleasure. He found them seductive, but ultimately hollow.
Seductive but hollow. That's quite the description from the creator.
And perhaps most notably, he took the step of putting parental controls on his own phone to limit his access. The sources highlight how jarring that is, the inventor needing to restrict himself from his own creation.
Yeah, if the chef won't eat his own cooking, that says something.
It really does. Another huge one. The newsfeed itself, combined with the pull to refresh gesture, swiping down to see new stuff.
We all do it constantly.
The sources explicitly compare that action to pulling a slot machine lever. You perform the action, swipe down, and boom, you get an unpredictable reward. A friend's update, news, a cat video, an ad. You never know.
The slot machine in your feed.
Exactly. And Lauren Brichter, the guy credited with inventing that pull to refresh, he later said he knew he'd made something habit-forming to a fault.
Another inventor with regrets. Seems to be a theme.
It does. Then there's Infinite Scroll, designed by Azza Raskin.
Ah, yes. Where the content just keeps loading forever.
Its specific design purpose is to eliminate stopping points. There's no bottom of the page anymore.
Right. You used to reach the end. You had a natural moment to pause.
By removing those pauses, it removes moments that allow the brain to reconsider what you're doing. It just facilitates, quote, endless scrolling and mindless binging.
Mindless binging. That sounds accurate.
Raskin has also expressed deep regret, estimating that infinite scroll has wasted, in his words, immense collective human time.
Framed as convenience, but actually designed to keep you passively consuming for longer.
And notifications. Can't forget notifications. Those little red dots, the banners, the sounds, the vibrations.
The phantom vibrations, where you think your phone buzzed, but it didn't.
Exactly. That's cited as evidence our brains are being rewired. These things are powerful triggers, designed to create an almost reflexive urge to check devices.
That red badge icon. It's like it screams, look at me.
It does. They're engineered to lure you back in, even for a quick check, which often turns into, 10 minutes, 20 minutes.
Right. You just pop in to see the notification, and suddenly you're deep in the feed.
And companies track this. The sources say they measure notification success by how well they pull users back. And that choice of the color red, not an accident. It's chosen specifically for its attention-grabbing properties in human psychology.
Like a little stop sign for your attention, telling it to stop here. What about gamification?
That's adding game mechanics, points, badges, streaks, leaderboards to things that aren't actually games.
Like snap streaks on Snapchat or progress bars on LinkedIn.
Exactly like snap streaks. That's a notorious example. It taps into our competitive drives, our desire for completion. Keep that streak going. Don't break the chain.
And kids feel real pressure about it, right? Like getting friends to log in for them if they can't.
They do. It harnesses those drives so effectively that it can lead to genuine compulsion and anxiety even when the stakes are artificial. The streak itself is meaningless, but the feeling it creates is very real.
And autoplay, like on YouTube or Netflix where the next video just starts.
That's about reducing friction, making it effortless to keep consuming.
No need to even click play on the next episode.
Right. Pitched as convenience, naturally. But it fundamentally removes a decision point, a natural pause where you might think, okay, maybe I'll stop now. It just keeps you flowing from one piece of content to the next, enabling that binge watch era.
Makes it easy to lose an entire evening without realizing it.
And finally, the sources mentioned the broader concept of constant availability. This goes back even to early smartphones, like the BlackBerry nicknamed the Crackberry for a reason.
Ah, yes. Constant email access. Marketed as efficiency.
Exactly. Productivity. Always be connected. Always on top of things. But the side effect, often downplayed, was the complete erosion of boundaries between work and life, between being on and off.
Creating that expectation of instant response 204/7.
Making it incredibly hard to ever feel truly off the clock, truly disconnected.
So looking at all these features together, likes, pull to refresh, infinite scroll, notifications, gamification, autoplay, constant connection, the sources argue there was this consistent narrative.
They were always framed as positive innovations, connection, efficiency, empowerment, sharing, expression.
But underneath that positive framing,
Underneath, powered by persuasive tech and the attention economy, they were also being intentionally designed to be deeply habit-forming, sometimes exploitative. The side effects, the distraction, the compulsion, the blurred boundaries weren't just unfortunate outcomes. They became integral to the business model.
companies talked about sharing, but the mechanism was dopamine hits.
Precisely. And for a long time, public understanding, and maybe even regulatory understanding, really lagged behind. People tended to blame themselves. I just don't have enough self-control.
Which brings us to how that perception started to change. Because it did change, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. For years, it was that familiar pattern. Dismiss the concerns as overreaction, blame the user's lack of self-control. Companies happily framed high usage as proof people loved their product.
We're just giving people what they want.
Exactly. But then came the turning point, which the sources really emphasize. It was driven by whistleblowers and insider admissions, people from inside tech starting to speak out.
Like Sean Parker admitting the goal was exploiting psychological vulnerabilities.
Yes, or Justin Rosenstein calling his own invention seductive but ultimately hollow and putting parental controls on his own phone. As the sources say, that was jarring, hard to ignore.
And Tristan Harris talking about the 1,000 engineers and the race to the bottom of the brainstem.
And even the creators of specific features, like Lauren Brichter for Pull to Refresh and Asa Raskin for Infinite Scroll, publicly expressing regret, admitting they made something habit-forming to a fault, wasting immense collective human time.
Those insider voices must have carried a lot of weight.
They were pivotal. They provided credible, undeniable evidence that the intense engagement wasn't just accidental or solely the user's fault. It was, at least partly by design, deliberate exploitation of psychology. That realization was, quote, jarring.
And this message started reaching a wider audience.
Yes, through major media coverage. The sources point to things like that 2017 Guardian article, Our Minds Can Be Hijacked, and especially the big impact of the 2020 Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma.
Ah, yeah, that film reached a huge audience, brought these ideas right into the mainstream.
And it resonated, the sources argue, because many people were feeling those consequences in their own lives or seeing them in their kids. Suddenly, that personal struggle, that nagging feeling of being hooked, it clicked. It wasn't just me, it's the system.
And new terms started entering our vocabulary around this time.
Absolutely. Digital addiction, nophobia, that's the fear of being without your phone, sometimes with actual withdrawal symptoms like anxiety, irritability,
Phobia.
doom scrolling, just endlessly consuming bad news online. Even phantom vibration syndrome, feeling your phone buzz when it didn't cite it as proof. Our brains are literally being rewired to anticipate these digital stimuli.
It feels like by the late 2010s, the whole conversation had shifted.
There was a real palpable sense, as one source puts it, of something's wrong, we need to recalibrate. A growing recognition that this wasn't just individual weakness, it was a systemic issue rooted in tech design.
And even the tech companies started kind of acknowledging it, introducing those digital well-being features.
Yeah, Apple's screen time, Google's digital well-being, Instagram's time limit reminders and parental controls, defensive moves maybe, or PR, according to some critics.
Right, because the core business model didn't really change.
Exactly. But it was still an admission, at least implicitly, that distraction and overuse were widespread problems. They started offering tools for balance, even if the underlying engine was still pushing for maximum engagement.
Okay, so we understand the mechanics, the shift in awareness. Now let's talk about the tangible costs. Beyond just feeling distracted, what are the actual impacts on us, individually and as a society, according to these sources?
The individual impacts are pretty stark, and they cover a lot of ground. Mental health is a huge one.
Yeah, the sources consistently link high social media and device use with increased rates of anxiety, depression, and loneliness, especially for young people.
It's that constant exposure to carefully curated highlight reels. Everyone else's life looks perfect, filtered, amazing. It fuels social comparison, which can really erode self-esteem.
And specific issues have emerged, right? Like Facebook depression.
Yes, or Snapchat dysmorphia, where people actually want plastic surgery to look like their filtered selfies. It's distorting body image.
That's disturbing. And then there's FOMO, the fear of missing out.
Constantly seeing what others are supposedly doing, feeling left out. And these dependency loops, the sources mentioned, where you feel bad using the platform, but you feel compelled to keep checking it anyway. It's a rough cycle.
Plus, cyberbullying extends schoolyard cruelty into a 247 digital space.
It follows kids home. There's no escape. And then there are the physical health impacts, which maybe get less attention sometimes.
Like sleep. That seems like a big one.
Huge. Chronic sleep deprivation. The blue light from screens messes with our circadian rhythms, our internal clocks, makes it harder to fall asleep, reduces sleep quality. And poor sleep affects everything: mood, concentration, physical health.
And posture. I've definitely heard about text neck.
Yeah, that strain from constantly looking down to your phone, and computer vision syndrome, eye strain, dry eyes, headaches, blurry vision from staring at screens too long.
Plus, just basic physical inactivity, right? If you're spending hours on a device.
You're likely not moving, which increases risks for obesity, heart disease, diabetes, especially if screen time is replacing time that could be spent playing outside or exercising.
And the danger of distraction itself. Distracted driving, even distracted walking.
It's serious. The compulsion to check the phone, even when you know it's dangerous, leads to accidents. That inability to resist the urge is a powerful sign of how ingrained these habits can become.
The sources even mention extreme, though thankfully rare, cases, like people dying from playing video games for days straight.
Yes, that tragic case in South Korea from 2005, the StarCraft player who collapsed after 50 hours. A shocking illustration of how powerful the compulsion can be.
And what about our brains? Our ability to think?
Cognitive effects are a major concern. Shorter attention spans are widely reported. difficulty concentrating, a state of continuous partial attention where you're sort of half attending to multiple things but never deeply focusing on one.
I feel that. Trying to read something complex, but your brain keeps itching to just quickly check your phone.
Exactly. And research cited shows that even just having your smartphone nearby, even if it's often face down, can impair your cognitive performance.
Really? Just its presence.
Yeah, because part of your brain subconsciously is working to resist the urge to check it. It's using up cognitive resources, leaving less available for the task at hand, leads to fragmented thinking, makes deep work much harder.
Wow. Okay. And relationships. These tools are supposed to connect us, but
Paradoxically, high usage can actually increase feelings of isolation, phubbing, phone snubbing,
Yeah.
ignoring the person right in front of you for your device. It damages the quality of real-world interactions.
we've all seen it or done it.
And social media can create this illusion of hyperconnectivity. But seeing everyone else's curated fun can paradoxically make you feel more lonely, more left out.
Yeah.
There are also worries about superficial friendships or younger generations struggling with face-to-face communication skills because so much socializing happens online.
So the individual costs are significant across mental, physical, cognitive, and social domains. But the source's stress, this isn't just an individual problem. It has broader societal impacts, too.
Absolutely. The problem ripples outward. The very design of these attention-grabbing platforms, especially social media, has profound effects on things like information flow and public debate.
This is where we get into disinformation and polarization.
Exactly. Because the algorithms are designed purely to maximize engagement, they learn that content provoking strong emotions, especially anger, outrage, fear, gets the most clicks, likes, shares.
So the algorithm promotes the stuff that makes us mad.
Pretty much, which fuels the spread of disinformation, fake news, conspiracy theories, because that stuff is often highly emotional and sensational. And it drives polarization by creating echo chambers.
Where you mostly see stuff you already agree with.
Right, the algorithm shows you more of what you like and engage with, reinforcing your existing beliefs and making you less exposed to and often less tolerant of different perspectives.
And former tech insiders have explicitly linked this engagement model to spreading misinformation. And even worse.
Yes, the sources cite insiders connecting addictive design to fueling misinformation campaigns, and even making it easier for extremist groups to recruit people by feeding them gradually more radical content.
That's deeply concerning, and it changes how we consume information generally.
Fundamentally,
Mm.
there's a shift away from, say, reading an in-depth article towards skimming headlines, reacting to memes, getting information in these tiny, often emotionally charged, decontextualized bursts.
Making thoughtful discussion harder.
Much harder. Nuance gets lost. It often becomes, as one source puts it, a shout fest rather than a dialogue, where the loudest, most provocative voices get amplified simply because they generate engagement, not because they're necessarily thoughtful or accurate.
And that doom scrolling habit, constantly consuming negative news, it can warp our perception of reality.
It can induce a state of chronic anxiety, a feeling that the world is constantly in crisis, which might not actually match your immediate lived experience. It distorts perspective.
And these platforms, initially sold as tools for connection and empowerment, they've also been weaponized.
That's the term used for everything from coordinated online harassment to spreading dangerous lies.
And the sources give truly horrific examples of real-world consequences.
Yes, like Facebook being used in Myanmar to spread hate speech and incite violence against the Rohingya minority, contributing to what the UN called genocide.
That's staggering, the link between online content and real-world violence.
Or in India, where false rumors spread rapidly via WhatsApp about supposed child kidnappers led to mobs attacking and killing innocent people based entirely on viral misinformation. The ease of forwarding just lets rumors spiral out of control.
It's chilling. So the societal cost? It's about the health of democracy itself.
In many ways, yes. Democracy depends on informed citizens capable of reasoned debate. That's much harder when the information environment is a manic frenzy driven by engagement metrics.
When emotion trumps reason because the algorithm prefers it.
Exactly. There's a huge societal cost when millions are, as the sources say, not fully present in their own lives or are reacting impulsively to algorithmic stimuli. It changes culture, politics, everything in unpredictable ways.
And since the basic psychology is universal, this isn't just happening in one country, it's a global issue.
Which means different parts of the world are trying to figure out how to deal with it, leading to varied approaches.
Right. Let's look at those global responses. South Korea comes up as an early example.
Yes, they were one of the first to really identify internet and gaming addiction as a public health problem, partly because they were so wired so early, and PC gaming is massive there. They saw the effects sooner.
So they didn't just wait and see.
No, they acted fairly quickly, set up counseling centers, government-funded rehab camps, put education about healthy tech use into schools. It was framed as balancing tech leadership with protecting young people,
And they passed that law, the shutdown law.
also called the Cinderella, yeah, passed in 2011. It was a direct government order. Online game companies had to block users under 16 from playing between midnight and 6 a.m.
Wow, a forced cutoff to make sure kids slept.
That was the goal. Direct intervention. Its strengths were that early recognition and decisive action, but it was criticized too, infringing on parental rights, kids finding ways around it with VPNs or using adult accounts.
And did it last?
It was in place for about 10 years, then replaced by a system relying more on parental permission for late-night gaming. So it evolved.
Okay, so South Korea took direct action early on. How does China's approach compare? The sources describe it as the strictest.
By far the most stringent top-down control. Their concerns about Wang-in internet overuse are framed very seriously, not just as health, but as a threat to youth morality and even national stability.
So it's tied into broader social control goals.
Seems that way. They've used really strong measures, mandatory, sometimes military-style, boot camps for addiction, which have faced accusations of abuse, and even top figures like Jack Ma have supported strict time limits.
And the gaming limits for minors, there are intense.
Drastically tightened in 2021. Now, it's essentially 3 hours of online gaming a week for minors. 1 hour on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and public holidays only. Completely banned 10 p.m. to 8 a.m.
3 hours a week? That's barely anything. How do they enforce that?
Real name registration is mandatory for games, and they use facial recognition tech to try and stop kids using adult accounts. They also push youth modes on apps like Douyin, TikTok to limit time and content.
What's the rationale versus the criticism there?
The government argues its decisive action protects kids, curbs addiction, and many parents apparently support it. The criticism is obviously about the authoritarian approach, the lack of personal freedom, though workarounds still exist for determined kids.
A very different philosophy from South Korea's move towards parental consent. How about Western nations, Europe, North America?
Initially, the approach there was much more focused on individual responsibility, awareness campaigns. Concerns were often downplayed or seen as something parents should handle. Direct government regulation was slower.
More emphasis on personal choice and self-control.
Right. But that's been shifting. Digital well-being is increasingly part of policy talks. France banned smartphones in schools for under 15s back in 2018. The UK has debated regulating features like infinite scroll for kids, and the NHS opened a gaming disorder clinic.
And in North America.
Pediatric groups like the AAP issue screen time guidelines. You see public awareness campaigns like Vancouver's Get Off the Phone and Into the Moment. And there are cultural shifts, too.
Like what?
Tech elites themselves sending their own kids to low-tech schools is mentioned, and countries like Finland and Singapore focusing heavily on digital literacy and self-regulation skills in their education systems, trying to equip kids to navigate it themselves.
What are the pros and cons seen in this Western approach?
Pro. It respects individual liberty, focuses on education. Con. It can be slower, and relying on self-control is tough when you're up against deliberately addictive design. Though the WHO classifying gaming disorder in 2019 does signal global medical recognition.
So, a real spectrum. Direct state control in China, evolving intervention in South Korea, and a mix of awareness, education, and slowly emerging regulation in the West.
Reflecting different philosophies, definitely. Public health crisis versus personal responsibility or consumer protection. But China's model is clearly the most comprehensive and strictly enforced.
But are there common threads emerging globally, despite the different methods?
Yes, a widespread realization that tech optimized only for engagement isn't necessarily good for people or society. That some kind of intervention is needed, whether it's rules, education, or design changes.
And the fact that it's universal human psychology being tapped means it's a shared challenge.
Exactly. And crucially, there's a growing movement to apply the lessons learned from social media to what's coming next. A push for humane innovation, building safeguards in from the start this time.
The goal of finding a healthier balance seems universal, even if the path there looks different everywhere.
Which leads us right to that next frontier the sources discuss, AR, VR, AI, and the potential for an even deeper hook.
Right. The sources suggest these could be the most profound qualitative shift yet, a deeper level of potential addiction. That sounds ominous.
It does. Makes you wonder if we're just doomed to repeat the cycle.
Mm.
But the sources offer a glimmer of hope here.
Oh,
The crucial difference this time is, quote, we are aware of these pitfalls now. We're having conversations about ethics, about potential harms during development, not just years after the fact, like with social media.
okay, so maybe we can be more proactive this time. Eyes open. How might these specific technologies deepen the addiction potential? Let's start with augmented reality, AR.
AR blends digital info with our view of the real world. Think smart glasses, the risk,
Mhm.
augmented overload, notifications, information, ads, maybe popping up literally in front of your eyes.
Wow, no escaping it. Constant distraction baked into your vision.
Exactly, making it incredibly hard to disengage. Blurring the lines between real and virtual constantly. You could be perpetually mentally split.
And virtual reality, VR, total immersion in digital worlds.
This takes the worries we saw with online games, people losing jobs, neglecting relationships, and potentially amplifies them. The sources mention the Ready Player One scenario, where people basically live in VR.
Where VR becomes the primary mode of being for some, making it almost impossible to define overuse. And crucially, future tech will likely overcome current limits like bulky headsets or motion sickness.
Removing the natural breaks that force us to take breaks now.
Potentially, yes, removing physical reasons to log off. And then there's artificial intelligence, AI, and the really far out stuff like neural interfaces.
This is where the sources suggest the biggest shift could happen.
Potentially, yes. With AI, we're already seeing reports of people forming extreme attachments to sophisticated chatbots, even falling in love.
Falling in love with an
Mhm.
AI.
Because AI can simulate empathy, fulfill emotional needs, leading to deep reliance. The sources raise the possibility of people eventually preferring AI companions to human friends.
That's a lot to process. And generative AI, AI that creates content. Imagine it creating perfectly addictive streams, tailored just for you. Your ultimate personalized pleasure feed. Music, video, news, social interaction, constantly optimized to keep you engaged.
The ultimate filter bubble, designed to be irresistible.
That's the concern. And the step beyond that, neural interfaces. Direct brain-computer connections.
Connecting tech straight to the brain.
The sources raise the possibility of direct stimulation of our reward circuitry, delivering those dopamine hits directly.
Why passing our choices altogether?
Potentially dangerously irresistible.
Hmm.
They use that classic, disturbing analogy of lab rats pressing a lever for brain stimulation.
Until they collapse, ignoring food and water.
Yeah, even well-intentioned interfaces may be designed to boost memory or learning, could make the normal, unaugmented brain feel dull by comparison, creating a powerful dependency.
So the fear shifts from just being glued to a screen to something much deeper, a potential loss of autonomy.
A risk of being manipulated, subtly or not, by corporations or even by AIs that understand our deepest desires better than we do ourselves. Fears of a digital opioid epidemic, where people retreat into virtual worlds, neglecting the real one.
That is a dark potential future. But the sources do end on a note of possibility, right? Ethical safeguards. Humane innovation.
Yes, thankfully. Again, the key is that these discussions are happening now. There's a real movement towards proactively building in safeguards, learning from the mistakes of the social media age.
Trying to design for well-being from the outset, not just engagement.
Exactly. Ideas mentioned include building default modes into AR/VR that limit interruptions, or maybe AI assistants designed to help us regulate our usage. Hey, maybe take a break. Even AI therapists are suggested.
But focus has to be on preserving human autonomy.
Absolutely. Transparency about how these systems work, how they might influence us, vigilance to spot problems early, and maybe we'll need a societal conversation about what counts as healthy versus harmful use in these immersive environments.
Yeah,
Is deep collaborative work in VR bad or just different?
that's a huge question we'll need to figure out.
The ultimate hope, outlined in the sources, is that we can steer this incredible innovation towards genuinely enhancing human life, connection, creativity, without inadvertently undermining our own minds and choices, building the guardrails before the high-speed crash.
Wow. Okay, that was definitely a deep dive. We've covered so much ground. From those early tech panics and their kernel of truth.
To that huge qualitative shift towards intentional, addictive design driven by the attention economy.
We've unpacked the psychology, dopamine, variable rewards, and the specific features engineered to hook us, like infinite scroll and notifications.
We've looked at the heavy cost, individual impacts on mental, physical, cognitive health, relationships.
And the profound societal costs, from disinformation and polarization right up to real-world violence and democratic strain.
We explored how different countries are trying to respond, that whole spectrum from China's strict control to the West's focus on awareness and slower regulation.
And finally, peered into the future with AR, VR, AI, the potential for an even deeper hook, but also the hope for more ethical, humane design this time around.
All drawn from the sources you provided. It really gives you a framework for understanding not just what's happening with our tech relationship, but why.
And listening to all this, it really makes you think about your own tech use, doesn't it? What stands out most to you from everything we've discussed? Which of those hooks do you feel pulling you?
And looking ahead, as technology gets even better at tailoring itself to us, maybe even stimulating our brains directly, the sources leave us with this really crucial question. How do we keep the power to choose? How do we make sure technology serves us, enhances our autonomy, rather than diminishing it?
That question feels incredibly urgent right now. Thank you for digging into these sources with us. It's been eye-opening.
Absolutely. Until next time, stay curious, keep asking. But why, though?